Hi, my name is Zan Tyler. I'll never forget the day that I was sitting in the State Superintendent of Education's office in South Carolina, and he threatened to put me in jail for truancy because I was insisting on homeschooling my oldest son. That was 1984. We knew no one in the world who homeschooled at that point in time. There were no state groups, there were no homeschooling support groups, no way to find out the law, no way to understand my rights. I was really frightened to death. I can remember going to visit my parents and telling them I had just been threatened with jail. My hearing at the State Board of Education was the next week. My local school board had already turned down our application to homeschool. And then evidently I was headed to jail. So through the intervention of my U.S. Senator Strom Thurmond, who flew down and met with the State Superintendent of Education for me, I was spared that visit to jail. But I'll never forget how I felt thinking that my freedom had been treated so flippantly and had been violated so easily when I was innocent. The only thing I was guilty of was loving my child and wanting to give him the best. So I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about what every homeschool mom needs, and that is freedom. We need to remember that freedom wasn't free, freedom isn't free, and all we need for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. So I want to tell you a few stories and give you a few hints on how to raise children who are freedom loving so that we always keep in mind this need to preserve our homeschooling freedom, because realistically we're only one bad law away or one bad lawsuit away in every state from losing some of that precious freedom that has been hard fought for and hard won. I was speaking at a leadership forum in South Carolina several years ago, and I was doing a section on homeschooling. I was the homeschooling guest. And this woman, after I spoke, raised her hand and said, "Don't you feel guilty for homeschooling?" And I thought a minute. I thought, well, I felt a lot of emotions about homeschooling because it's really hard, but I'd never felt guilty. And I asked her why she asked that question. She said, because you're robbing the school district. You're robbing the school district of the money they would get if your kids were in school. You're robbing them of kids who have grown up in a good home and would be good students and probably have good test scores. And she went on with this litany. And so I asked her, who do you think my kids belong to? And she was silent. And so I pulled a piece of paper that I tended to keep in my purse at that point in time. And I read her this. I read the whole audience this. The fundamental theory of liberty upon which all governments in this union repose excludes any power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. The child is not a mere creature of the state. Those who nurture and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. She asked me, where'd you get that? I said, from the United States Supreme Court. It was a decision back in 1925, the United States versus the Pierce versus the Society of Sisters. And so I just want to remind you that even though we all probably do or should have an understanding that our children don't belong to the state, many of your neighbors won't understand that. Many of your legislators won't understand that. Many judges don't understand that our children don't belong to the state. So we need to be aware of what our freedoms are so that we can protect them. Several years ago, Joe and I had the privilege of speaking at a homeschool conference in Williamsburg, Virginia. And as I spoke, Joe went and purchased our tickets to later visit historic Williamsburg. He said that the visitor center was pretty empty, and he asked a docent about it and said something like, well, I guess when spring break occurs in a couple of weeks, this place will really be hopping. And she said, well, our attendance has really been down since public schools have quit teaching American history and the principles of American freedom. That was so sobering and disturbing to Joe and me on so many different levels. but it really raises the issue here that we have to be diligent in teaching our children those principles of freedom upon which this government was founded. We need to teach them the principles of the Constitution. We need to teach them American history. I want to give you some practical ways to bring them up to be civically involved so that they grow up to be freedom fighters along with you. The first is take your kids to vote. Always vote, regardless of the level of the election, local, state, or national, and take your kids with you in the voting booth. Discuss who you're voting for and why. When the next presidential election comes along in 2020, have maps for each of your kids that are blank with the empty states showing. And as a Republican wins a state, have them color it red. As a Democrat candidate wins the state, have them color it blue and mark each state with the number of electoral votes. We often did this with our children. It made for really late nights, but they loved staying up late, eating popcorn, drinking soft drinks, things we didn't usually do, so that they could learn how important these elections are and begin to understand them. Get to know your state representative and state senator as well as your national congressman and senator. They want to know you. They want to know your kids. Constituents are an important part of every elected official's grid. And I would also encourage you to get involved in campaigns. Find the pro-family, pro-life, pro-homeschooling candidates in your area and learn how to participate. I can't tell you how many phone banks my kids and I have done together, how many signs we have held in the pouring down rain for candidates, how many times we've stood at the election site shaking hands and asking people to vote for a particular person. So politics at that level is not glamorous, but it's very, very necessary. Take your kids with you to do that. If your state organization has a homeschool day at the Capitol, make sure you go and make your presence and your voice known to those state legislators, that's those state senators. And then I would encourage you to join your state organization. Keep up with the legislative challenges or the legal challenges that are occurring on an annual basis to your homeschool freedom. We're a powerful voice now, the homeschooling community, but we can't sit back and let those who oppose us chip at our freedoms and eventually erode them all. So I also want to encourage you as we end to join Homeschool Legal Defense Association. HSLDA formed in 1983 on the West Coast and became more of a national presence as it moved to the East Coast. They were extremely helpful to me in keeping me out of jail, in keeping other homeschoolers out of jail in South Carolina, and filing very important court cases that actually had implications at the state Supreme Court level for other states. So as you join HSLDA, you are participating in their work as they preserve freedom. You ask, why do we need HSLDA now when homeschooling is free and legal in every state? The answer to that question is that we are only a lawsuit or a bad law away from losing some or all of our precious homeschool freedoms that we have fought so hard to win. So let me encourage you to join HSLDA and continue to fight for freedom at the state, the national, and even the international level. As we close, I have an exciting announcement to make to you, and that is that your homeworks consultant will now be representing HSLDA and will be able to offer you discounted membership prices to join HSLDA. And as you join HSLDA and stand with the thousands and thousands and thousands of family who also belong, you'll be taking a further commitment on that road to saying, here we stand for freedom, and we're willing to fight for it. Thanks so much.